This is Battletech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained. $10.7 billion, roughly 70,000 people, less than 3% of the entire American military. And out of that 3% comes a structure that makes almost no sense the first time you look at it. There are Green Berets, there are Rangers, there is Delta Force, which officially does not exist under that name. There are SEAL teams, and then there is a separate SEAL unit that most people know by a number the Navy stopped using decades ago. There are Marine Raiders, Air Force Pararescuemen, combat controllers, and a helicopter regiment whose pilots fly at night, at 50 feet, in weather that grounds everyone else. 9 or more distinct organizations, overlapping skills, competing budgets, separate selection courses, each one with a failure rate somewhere between 50 and 90%. And every single one of them is, on paper, doing a version of the same thing, sending very small numbers of very expensive people into places where large formations cannot go. So here is the question nobody asks. If quality beats quantity, and every one of these units exists to deliver quality, why does the United States need 9 of them instead of one really good one? The answer is not tradition. It is not inter-service rivalry, though that plays a part. The real answer is written into a 5-line document the Special Operations Command has kept on its wall since the 1980s, and once you understand that document, the entire structure stops looking like bureaucratic sprawl and starts looking like the most deliberate insurance policy in the American military. If the economics of modern warfare are your kind of rabbit hole, subscribe now. New long-form episodes every Wednesday, new Decoded episodes every Saturday. To understand why any of this exists, you have to start in a stretch of Iranian desert in April of 1980. The mission was called Operation Eagle Claw. The objective was to rescue 53 American hostages from the embassy in Tehran. The plan required Army operators, Navy helicopters flown by Marine pilots, and Air Force transport aircraft, all converging on a refueling point in the desert, all coordinating for the first time, under radio silence, at night. It never reached Tehran. 3 of 8 helicopters went down or turned back. At the refueling site, a helicopter collided with a transport aircraft in a cloud of dust. 8 servicemen were killed. The wreckage was still burning when the mission was aborted. The investigation that followed found something more uncomfortable than bad luck. The units had never trained together. They used different radios. They answered to different chains of command. Every individual element was competent. The assembled whole was not, because nobody had ever assembled it before. That failure produced 2 things. It produced the Joint Special Operations Command, stood up later that same year, to make sure the Tier 1 units trained together permanently instead of meeting for the first time on the night of a mission. And 7 years later, over the objections of the services themselves, Congress forced the creation of United States Special Operations Command, giving it something no other command has: its own budget authority, its own money, to buy its own equipment, on its own timeline. That last detail is the one that matters for everything that follows. Special operations in America are not a capability the services provide. They are a separate economy inside the military, with a separate wallet, because the alternative was Desert One. Before we go through the units themselves, you need the 5 lines, because they explain every structural decision that follows. They are called the soft truths. Humans are more important than hardware. Quality is better than quantity. Special operations forces cannot be mass-produced. Competent special operations forces cannot be created after emergencies occur. And most special operations require non-special operations assistance. Read those again as an economist rather than a soldier, and they stop being motivational and start being a set of hard production constraints. Humans over hardware means the expensive part of this system cannot be bought. Quality over quantity means you cannot solve a shortfall by lowering the bar. Cannot be mass-produced means there is no surge capacity, ever. Cannot be created after emergencies means the entire force has to be paid for in peacetime, years before anyone knows what it will be used for. And requiring non-special operations assistance means every one of these units is dependent on a conventional military that dwarfs it. Put those 5 constraints together and you get a very specific kind of organization. Something that has to be built slowly, funded continuously, and maintained at full readiness during exactly the periods when it is hardest to justify the expense, which is why it has its own budget. A capability that takes 5 to 10 years to grow cannot survive annual competition with things that can be bought off a shelf next quarter. Start with the Army, which fields 3 distinct special operations organizations, and the differences between them are the clearest illustration of why one unit could never cover all of this. Green Berets, formerly Army Special Forces, operate in 12-man teams called Operational Detachment Alphas. Every ODA carries weapons, medical, engineering, communications, and intelligence expertise, doubled up so the team can split in half and still function. And nearly every member speaks a second language because their primary mission is not raiding. It is training and leading foreign forces, sometimes for years, in places where an American brigade would be a political impossibility. One ODA can turn a few hundred local fighters into something resembling a battalion. That is force multiplication, and it is the cheapest form of military power the United States produces. The language requirement alone tells you how different this is from everything around it. Teaching an adult soldier to operate professionally in a second language takes months of full-time instruction before he has fired a shot in training, and the skill decays if it is not maintained. That is an ongoing cost with no visible output, defended year after year in budget documents, for a capability that only pays off when a crisis happens somewhere that particular language is spoken. Every other branch would have cut it decades ago. Special Operations Command can protect it precisely because it controls its own money. The Ranger Regiment answers a completely different question. What happens when you need 300 elite infantrymen on an airfield in a hostile country before sunrise? Rangers are not a small teams organization. They seize and hold terrain, at scale, faster than anyone else. Different selection, different training pipeline, different purpose entirely. Then there is the unit at Fort Bragg that the Army does not discuss, referred to in official documents by initials rather than a name. It exists for the missions where failure is not survivable, politically or strategically. Hostage rescue, counterterrorism at the highest tier. Its selection process is separate again, its funding is compartmented, and most of its operations will never be publicly acknowledged. That compartmentation is itself a budgetary fact. A meaningful portion of what America spends on special operations is not visible in the documents anyone can read, which means every public figure in this episode, including the ones we are using, is a floor rather than a total. And flying all 3 of them is the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, who exist because delivering these people is a specialized problem of its own. Their pilots fly modified helicopters at extreme low altitude, at night, and hold themselves to a standard measured in seconds, arriving on target plus or minus 30 seconds of the planned time, not minutes, seconds. Naval Special Warfare covers the water, and the pipeline behind it is the one we broke down in a previous episode, where $620,000 buys the elimination of roughly 80% of candidates. But SEAL teams are not the whole picture. Special Warfare Combatant Craft crewmen operate the boats that insert and extract them, a separate selection, a separate skill set, and a job that means being the one still exposed on the water while the team is ashore. And there is a further SEAL organization based in Virginia that occupies the same tier as the Army's unnamed unit, with the same compartmented funding and the same official silence. The Marine Corps was the last to join, standing up its own Special Operations Command in 2006, more than a decade after everyone else. That delay was not an oversight. The Marine Corps argued, for years, that it was already an elite expeditionary force and did not need a separate elite inside it. It took the sustained tempo of 2 wars to change that position. Marine Raiders now run their own selection and specialize in direct action and special reconnaissance from the sea. And then the Air Force, whose special operators are the least visible and arguably the most consequential. Combat controllers are certified air traffic controllers who parachute into hostile territory and then run an airfield or call in airstrikes with a precision nobody else can match. Pararescue men recover downed pilots and wounded personnel from places nobody else can reach, and their training pipeline is among the longest and highest attrition in the entire American military. Their motto is about saving lives rather than taking them, which makes them the only special operations community whose primary product is recovery. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A recovery capability is the one thing in this entire structure that has to exist before anyone will accept the risk of the rest of it. Pilots fly deeper, teams go further, and planners approve harder missions specifically because somebody is standing by to come get them. Take that away, and every other unit in this episode becomes more cautious overnight without a single line of doctrine changing. It is the least visible line in the budget and the one that quietly sets the risk tolerance for everything else. Now put the whole structure side by side, and the apparent duplication resolves.
These units are not 9 versions of the same capability. They are 9 answers to 9 different physics problems. Getting in by water is not getting in by air. Holding an airfield is not raiding a compound.
Training a foreign battalion over 18 months is not a 4-minute assault. Recovering a wounded pilot from a mountainside is not directing an airstrike onto a target 3 miles away. Each of those requires equipment, selection criteria, and years of accumulated instinct that do not transfer. You cannot take an operator trained for maritime infiltration and use him to run an airfield seizure. Not because he is not good enough, but because the specific knowledge takes years to build and decays when it is not used. And here is the part that turns this from a military argument into an economic one. Every one of those 9 capabilities has to exist before anyone knows which one will be needed. That is the fourth soft truth doing its work. If a crisis emerges that requires deep water infiltration, and the United States has spent a decade optimizing for desert raids, there is no purchase order that fixes it. The people who can do that job are 10 years from existing. So the redundancy is not waste, it is coverage. The United States maintains 9 expensive, partially overlapping special operations communities for the same reason it maintains a nuclear triad. Not because all 3 legs are needed simultaneously, but because you cannot know in advance which one will be unavailable when it matters. This is Decoded, the series that breaks down the real cost behind the systems everyone else just calls impressive. New episode every Saturday. So what does that coverage actually cost? The operations and maintenance line alone for Special Operations Command runs to roughly $10.7 billion in the current spend plan, and that is only one part of the budget. Add procurement, research and development, and the aircraft, and the total footprint is substantially larger, for a force that represents under 3% of American military manpower. Now hold that against a different number. Special Operations Forces are deployed to somewhere on the order of 80 countries in a typical year, in roles ranging from open combat to training missions almost nobody reads about. 3% of the manpower, carrying a share of the global commitment that no conventional formation comes close to matching. That ratio is the actual product, not the raids, not the footage. The ability to have a competent, culturally trained, appropriately equipped team available in almost any country, on short notice, without deploying a division and triggering everything that a division deployment implies politically. And that ratio only holds because of the constraint that makes all of this expensive in the first place. You cannot mass produce it. The moment the standard drops to meet demand, the thing being purchased stops existing, and the budget is buying uniforms instead of capability. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part. For 2 decades, this force was optimized for a specific kind of war: small teams, permissive airspace, uncontested communications, an enemy without an air force. Every instinct built during those years assumed a world where an American helicopter could fly where it wanted and a satellite link would always be there. The wars now being studied look nothing like that. Contested airspace, jammed communications, adversaries with drones, satellites, and the ability to see a small team long before it reaches its objective. The infiltration methods that worked for 20 years are the same methods that a modern integrated air defense network is specifically designed to detect. So a force that takes 5 to 10 years to build is currently being asked to rebuild itself for a completely different problem, while still doing the old job, without any ability to surge, and with a budget under the same pressure as every other line in the Pentagon. That is not a crisis. But it is exactly the situation the fourth soft truth was written to warn about, and the warning was that this is not the kind of thing you can fix once you need it. We do not count the kills, we count the bill. And the bill for American Special Operations is not really $10.7 billion. It is a permanent, unhedgeable commitment to maintaining 9 separate human systems, each one taking a decade to grow, each one useless if the standard drops. All of them paid for in years when nothing appears to be happening, precisely so they exist in the year something does. Every other part of the defense budget can be accelerated with money. Production lines can be expanded, ships can be ordered, missiles can be stockpiled. This is the one category where the check cannot buy the thing, because the thing is a person who has spent 10 years becoming difficult to replace. Which raises a question nobody has actually answered. If the next war looks nothing like the last one, and the force takes a decade to reshape, and the reshaping has to start before anyone knows what it is reshaping for, how does the United States know it is building the right 9 units right now, rather than the 9 that would have been perfect for a war that already ended? If you want the next system decoded like this one, subscribe and drop a comment with what you want broken down next. This has been BattleTech Declassified, made to listen. No screen required.